I think one thing we can all agree with is that regardless of fantasy role-playing game at your table, tracking resources, whether it be food, water, it's a drag. It's kind of a bummer. Almost every single table that I have ever played at, except for maybe 1 or 2 sessions with you, it has been hand-waved away. No one cares about it. It's either solved with gold or just completely ignored.
It's a shame because it can truly transform what type of game you're playing. And it's hard in some systems when there are walls. A lot of walls that happen in Dungeons & Dragons are spells that are available to the players at early level that just completely nullify things like food and water being an issue running low on, right?
Goes for Pathfinder as well.
Yeah.
A lot of any high epic fantasy game with big dick slinging wizards and magic. Oh, they got them Goodberries and all sorts of stuff that just immediately rips the tension out of a survival situation.
How do we transform a game like this into a more brutal survival setting where we're changing the decisions that players are making? Is really the crux of what we want to do here. We don't want players to be sitting in front of their pages tracking more crap, right?
No, that is immediately going to make your players want to quit. If it's too much math and Excel's, dungeons and Excel,
yeah.
Excel sheets, they don't want to do that. It has to be a simplified system. It has to be Camo's wonderful trademark pending food and foraging system coming to a table near you. Check it out.
Nice pitch, nice pitch.
I got you. I'm your hype man. The system that Camo has come up with is brilliant, and it is system neutral, and you can use it for any fantasy role-playing system.
Probably the only game you don't need to add this to is Torchbearer. I feel like Torchbearer is hard enough on you. It's very Darkest Dungeon if you're a gamer. I like to reference Torchbearer in this episode because Torchbearer gives negative conditions to players every 5 turns, I believe. And those conditions start piling up. Player focus is more on self-preservation at that point, and it really nails that piece of survival, where not only are you focusing on going through the dungeon and puzzle solving, killing enemies, you probably want to avoid enemies in a game like Torchbearer if you can, right? There's ways to, you can either commit to kill, commit to run away, and it's a different focus of the game, and it gets players to think differently. So how are we going to get our players to think differently in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, where, I mean, exhaustion can just be avoided quite easily? I love to experiment with every game I play, I really do. Every time I start a new game that I run, I'm trying something different. And I fail a lot of some of the things I try, but then I also find diamonds in the rough where people say certain things don't work. And I'm like, well, I've made this work. One of the things I failed at was adding more tracking, right? I wanted survival to be deeper and to have more focus on the survival aspects of like foraging and like group composition while you're walking through difficult terrain, like who's leading the party, who's scouting, who's looking back for dangers, who's at the back of the line, right? Party order, different terrain areas and the foraging modifiers that you're expected to achieve when someone goes foraging, right? And
to interject, it's almost an older style
yes.
of game where you were sort of expected to deal with this type of stuff if you were playing D&D.
Yeah.
Way back when, and now it's more. It's gotten away from that. It's gotten away from these types of systems and put more of a focus on just getting to the epic action.
Yeah. Well, because no one wants to track, right? And I think that was the biggest problem. Is that it really started becoming about tracking, marking things down on your pen and paper on your sheet, and we're not really in action, you know, or not even really thinking about an engaging encounter, even if we're not fighting something like we're starving, right? That even something like that wasn't really coming up. So, and my mistake with it was trying to push it on players. And trying to make tracking easier, but I ended up making like tracking a little harder. Like tracking just became more. Even though I came up with this whole spreadsheet of how to track what your character is doing. Are they foraging? Are they searching? Are they aware of dangers? What are they doing? The time of day that it is, how many hours they need until rest. Like, it turned into a different game. It became that micromanaging. Right?
You created like a beautiful mind subsystem of
Yeah.
of nonsense, and that's not what most people want.
I didn't like what came out of it, and so I just scrapped it. I learned my mistakes from that game, and when I began running my Dark Sun campaign, I was running 2 groups of 4, alternating weeks. They were like in the same world, and man, I really wanted the focus. I mean, the themes of Dark Sun are survival, and if you really want a game where that theme is your center, where survival is the center, I really felt like it was my job to maintain and emphasize that point, rather than the player's job to maintain that point. So all I really did was I bought some glass beads. I don't know if you can tell the color from the camera, but I have some blue glass beads to represent water, and I have some brown glass beads to represent food. And before they went on an adventure through the desert, they would have to stockpile, and these would only really be used for those instances where they were away from a city, away from civilization, trying to survive. When survival kicked in, these would come out.
So where would you put these? Because I was not involved in these games.
So these would just literally be at the side of my Dungeon Master screen, and I wanted players to be able to see this.
So they're front and center, so everyone at the table is acutely aware of how much water is available to the party,
Exactly.
how much food is available to the party.
So that every player can visibly see this as a representation, almost like a dwindling pool, right?
It's like a meter.
A meter, like in a video game, a meter. That's what I wanted it to feel like, because in a video game for survival, you really just have meters of food, and you're not paying attention to the meter when it's green or yellow when it's at its top, but you notice when it's red. When you see the meters red, your mind supersedes everything else that you need to do, and it becomes the first thing that you need to do now, the most important thing you need to do.
All the other dangers and things sort of take a back seat, right?
Yes.
While you're like, oh, I got to eat and drink, otherwise it doesn't matter if I make it to my destination or find the MacGuffin of doom.
So now you're asking your DM, I'd like to forage for food. And then you're asking your DM, like, okay, let's, if there's a trail of silt runners, then we'd like to follow that trail. Maybe they ran into some food. Maybe we eat them. Right?
You rob people. You could rob a caravan, or you get that desperate if it's becoming life or death.
Yeah, it's like, what do? You make these difficult decisions, because that's what a survival game, and that's what that brutal survival is really like. So this dwindling pool, for 5th edition, it represents, basically a pip is a gallon of water, and a pip of food is like half a pound, because they have the choice to eat half as much, right? So whatever system you're running, whatever like the smallest increment of food and water is, that's what these pips can represent, right? So when your players use them for the day, or if there are external circumstances that perhaps make them lose food or water, I threw these at my players a lot during a Dark Sun campaign, if they were running into troubles along the way, right? So it was kind of like part of my random encounter table was not just creatures they were running into. They were in a desolate land where things don't really exist. So more of the troubles they were running into were like Oregon Trail troubles, right? A wheel on the cart breaks. Their water skins start to fill with sand because of a sandstorm that comes by. And this simple system can really just apply to anything. It's a visual representation. Your players are not focused on the rations and the water that they have. And you don't run into the troubles of like arguing with the player of like, oh, you should have had way less rations than I think you do, because like everyone else ran out and you didn't, you had extra. Like there's no way for the GM to track what you have if they're taking care of it, you know?
Yeah, you're not gonna be the person that's like, everybody give me a sheets.
Yeah, no.
Oh, you guys haven't been tracking shit.
Come on, and players don't
No,
a
nobody
lot.
does.
Even though the GM has asked players, like, this is going to be a larger focus, even if during session 0 they were like, this is going to be a large focus during our campaign. I'd like you guys to track all the food and water. It doesn't happen the way that
No, it's gonna last.
like.
It's gonna last maybe 1 to 3 sessions.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna be like, hey, Mr. Handwave comes along, and we're not gonna worry about that.
If you as a game master want to commit to this, it is something you have to commit to. I don't know if I said this before, but this represents the whole party's combined water and food, where if there are 5 players, this represents 5 gallons. And if there are 5 players here, this is 2.5 gallons, because this is like a half pound. Sorry.
That's food.
Thank you. 2.5 gallons of food. So this represents a half pound of food for each player. If you have 5 players, 2.5 pounds of food in this little pit, right? It's a vague representation, but hey, your players were just going to forget about it anyway, right?
we were.
So they actually don't really care about the micromanagement division of each of these pips sometimes. And they only really care when it's like, oh, we're getting low, boys and girls, like, time to do something about it. So once players are out of food or water, you're going to start giving penalties based on days without food or water, right? The various rules, we'll show them here. This is 5E's rule system. If you're not drinking water, you get exhaustion that day. If you've been without food for 3 days, you start accruing exhaustion. The current rules for exhaustion in 5E are 5 to dead, right? They're kind of difficult to remember. It's always been a weirdly structured exhaustion system for me. I did something different for my Dark Suns campaign, but for 1D&D, it's like -1 to most of your saving throws and ability checks and
becomes
speed.
a negative modifier.
Yes, and it eventually can get to -10. You don't die, but your character pretty much becomes useless, which is a pretty great system, right? I feel like there should be kind of death saving throw near the end of more than 6. I don't know. It's better. And then in Pathfinder, you have fatigue as a debilitation.
A condition
Condition that you can use.
They like conditions in Pathfinder, where I believe it gives you a -1 to your armor class and like saving throws, and you can't do like exploration actions or something. Forgive us, we're fairly new to
We're learning.
Pathfinder. So penalties, yeah. I would even create my own if I was implementing the system. Like I would actually probably just trash the exhaustion system, or I would just come up with. Like if you're in Dungeon Crawl Classics, you move down the dice chain. If you're in 5e, you're gonna get disadvantage. You're just like, I just want like cleaner, more impactful things.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like you don't have water and stuff. You start getting sick. And you start introducing sicknesses or diseases.
I was doing things like heat stroke.
Hell yeah.
During games where one player consumes a lot more water than they need, and I just like throw away a pip. And that was like failing Constitution saving throws for heat.
Yep. Yeah.
I had a lot of cards that I had made for those kinds of effects.
Anything else to Kamo's wide and wondrous world of foodie beads?
No way, man. It's simple, and I tried to make it simple, and this has really worked for games that I want to change. Also, it's worth mentioning that I had to remove quite a few things from the game that could just solve this issue in a heartbeat, from Dungeons and Dragons at least.
And tell us what?
Goodberry.
Goodberry sucks a lot.
Kill it.
Just get rid of that.
Session 0, tell your players, look, these spells, sorry, but they're not being utilized. If they're part of your class, we'll work on giving you something else, right?
Well, I just think it's stupid that, like, in 5th edition or Pathfinder, they come up with these spells at such low levels that they immediately make these subsystems completely worthless.
Well, I guess you can't have a survival game at level 3, so...
Not even. It's like level 1. Goodberry's a level 1 spell in 5th edition. That is so stupid.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, yeah, you're surviving on Goodberries all day. Like, now you've got, like... nobody actually tells you this, but if you eat more of like 5 of these in a row, it's like you just get debilitating diarrhea.
Like they grow inside you like watermelons. There's also create food and water. breaks this entire thing. That
Poop.
needs to be shut down
Bye.
at session 0. Needs to be shut down. Also, there's a couple of spells that early on you don't really want players to have access to, like an extra dimensional space where they can just store everything they need, like pull down the attic door from out of nowhere, like Rope Trick, and store a warehouse of food that they can just access at any time, right? Like, it might be cool later on in the campaign, maybe increase the level of spells like that, and that would be fine, because maybe they might get sick of doing this after a while and just become more higher level, and they're like, well, we've dealt with our food and water issues in Athos, right? Yeah. So things like Rope Trick, Leo's Tiny Hut, and Mordenkaisen's Mansion of Madness or something.
Magnificent
Mansion. Exit all.
Heroes Feast.
Hike the level up, or whatever you want to do for those spells at session 0. The other one you want to X out at session 0 is likely Purify Water food.
Make that like a magic item you can find somewhere.
Yeah.
As opposed to being a spell that you can.
And make it like an ability check to see if it works,
Yeah, give it there some chance where you just like, you drink it. Sounds like you've sort of play tested this thing to a chef's kiss, and it's really simple, and I like that.
It worked. It changed players' agency
Yes.
of rethinking what they needed to do, and that's exactly the effect I wanted.
Yeah, because if you're running a game, your job is to provide obstacles and complications and walls and things for the players and the party to figure out and overcome. And traveling is, again, it's typically something that's just sort of hand-waved, and it's like, maybe you'll have a random encounter. Maybe it'll just be like the weather turns bad. I think that in most games, foraging and exploration and that pillar of play is drastically underutilized because a lot of the subsystems are hand-waved because, like you said, players don't want to track this stuff. So I think the genius part of this system is that as the game master running it, you're in charge of it. So if I'm a player, I have zero thinking I have to do. I can still just be all over my character sheet, and then while we're doing stuff, it's like you're manipulating that, and you're letting me know when it's in trouble.
Yes.
That is amazing. I absolutely adore that. I love it, and I think it should be in any game that is, maybe you're dealing with deserts, you're dealing with hot jungle areas, you're dealing with frozen areas. So if there's a lot of official adventures that deal with these things, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, there is if you're playing 5e and maybe Pathfinder.
I wanted them to trust the system because it's something I created. I didn't want them to doubt it. So session 0, I immediately explained this to the T of what it represents, right? Even though it is a representation, I put a number on it, gallon, whatever, half gallon for the whole party.
Yep.
Understood it right away, and there's no questions about it. They believe in it, and that's really all we really need at the beginning. You can do this virtually as well. It's pretty easy to create. Like value bars on Roll20, you could just use a token, add the hit points and mana points, and use it as food and water.
I think you should just have behind you a big old gallon of like water and like a big massive candy bar, and throughout the game you just start eating it on them.
It's like a Big Mac.
Yeah, you're like, this is all you got left. You piss me off, and it's gonna be less.
Yeah, there's ways to do it virtually too, so it's definitely a virtual tool that'll work. Experiment as game masters, try new things out, and you might run into something that really works.
Go ahead and click in the Nether realm down below where we have a small written out rule set for this system that Camo has devised, and it also gives a list of all the spells that we tell you to get rid of if you're playing the world's most popular fantasy role-playing game.
If you created a mechanic that works in your games yourselves, show us and tell us what they are in the comments. Thanks for watching, folks. If you'd like to keep up with our content, subscribe to Basic Liches and Told the Dead for notifications.
We've got an awesome video about creating a random villain right here. We do it all from scratch using tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Go and check it out, guys.
It's pretty dope. Later, Liches.
Bye-bye.